Hello, Blinn 2306, Summer 2 online students. I thought I'd drop you guys a quick video to discuss the long essay assignments that are coming up in the next couple weeks. So this will be pretty brief, but just really wanted to emphasize some parts to these two assignments. The assignments themselves are very similar. They're still two different topics. So let's just briefly go over the requirements. So at first it says 500 to 1,000 words. And the first question is analyzing the relationship between the relevant local governments, the Texas state government, and the American federal governments regarding the regulation of public education, emergency management, or health and human services. So just pick one of those three topics. Briefly, education, we K through 12 and even colleges, we receive grant funding and other sources of revenue from the federal government, as well as the state government and sometimes the local government. And that's part of the reason your tuition is lower at the community college is oftentimes because of local funding. I know you have a unique situation at Blinn, but some taxpayers in that area do pay local taxes. And just so you know, everybody always wants something for their money, and so what are we giving them in return? Healthcare, you may have heard things about Obamacare these last few years. It's still on the news today, and that's the federal government imposing some rules and laws around how healthcare will be carried out, as well as things like Medicare and Medicaid. So if states receive those monies, the things they have to do to get those, and yeah, they don't have to, but it's so much money that oftentimes people feel compelled to. And then emergency management, a lot of that, when is something a federal emergency? So maybe think back to things like major catastrophes like Hurricane Katrina. One of the issues we had at that time was figuring out who was in charge. Was it the city of New Orleans or the other municipalities? Was it the state of Louisiana? Was it the federal government? And there was plenty of blame to go around. But sometimes just figuring out who has the authority to do whatever. Briefly, one issue we had during that time was the state of Louisiana not letting in Texas physicians because they weren't board certified to practice medicine in the state of Louisiana. Who are we going to allow to lift those, at least temporarily, to get assistance to people who need them, or are the states going to stand by and try to control that? Do we give states the control to spend federal dollars, or is that outside their authority? As the taxpayers contributing to those federal dollars, do we trust the state of Louisiana or whatever place to spend that money, or do we want to have controls that to the group that we gave it to, which in this case is the federal government? And then just ongoing things like funding for police departments, as some of them need money to update their infrastructure on new equipment and things like this. If we want to have professional policing throughout the country, how are we going to help these small places that would have a hard time affording new cruisers? There's been things about technology in regards to body cameras and things like this that can be overwhelming for a small place to have. But perhaps as someone who travels around, we want to make sure you have professional police departments, even in the smallest of places. So you can take a look at any of those areas, try to dig in a little deeper and see that relationship between the state, local, and federal authorities. And we're just trying to discover how all these things work together, what their differing agendas are in those different realms. And that's where the scholarly sources come in. Now, a brief word about scholarly sources. These are peer reviewed. So typically you utilize the library through Blinn, and this is what EBSCO host, these different places. You're looking for academic journals. In an academic journal, if I write something and submit it to an academic journal, they don't just print that right away. They send it to a group of people who validate what I have said. That's the peer-reviewed part. So this is a different standard than is utilized, let's say, for newspapers, magazines, online websites where I could just write it and put it on a website, and and maybe it's right or not, but it hasn't held up to the scrutiny of my peers in my respective field. And so typically these things have titles such as journal, review, or keywords. But when you go to the library's website, you can actually click a radio button that will just only give you responses that are peer reviewed. Excuse me. Be sure to take a look at the rubric that's provided on the long essays to help formulate your response, and that's what I'll be using to grade it. So let's shoot for a minimum of 2 scholarly sources on each long essay, up to 4. And you can use non-scholarly resources. I just want to see some of those. Sometimes you don't need scholarly resource information if it's validating a date or an event. If you found something that said so many people died in Hurricane Katrina, it's from the New Orleans newspaper, that's fine. That's factual information. But maybe something discussing the relationship between those the federal government and local government. You'll want to have some scholar behind that and the work that stood up to scrutiny. So I'm not saying you can't use primary sources or non-scholarly sources, but you do need to include a few of those. For the second one, analyze the Texas legislative branch, that's the House and the Senate, the executive branch, and the judicial branch for a demographic characteristic of your choice. Explain why you see that demographic characteristic as important. Describe your analysis found and significance of those findings. So what we're looking for in demographics are things like age, gender, race, whatever you like to define. Your book has a healthy discussion on these things. And then maybe compare that to the reflection of the state as a whole. So let's say the state's probably 50-50 men and women. What is the state Supreme Court made of? The Criminal Court of Appeals. Let's say I'd have to revisit it, but let's say the court is only 25% women. Are we comfortable with that? Does that reflect the values of our society? And then you'd want to say what that difference means. So you'd identify things within what we call the gender gap, and that's how men and women, just for that reason alone, may view issues differently. And so maybe we're not getting reflective policy because of these demographic differences. The state's about 40% Hispanic. You may find that the legislature is not 40% Hispanic. How does that play out as far as laws that are being made? And then there you would find instances where Latino populations and other populations differ on views, and you can find that information on a variety of different issues. And something you should be aware of, the age gap. The lawmakers are typically much older than the median population, and so do we get policies that benefit elderly people, maybe at the expense of our youth? I'll tell you, the cost of higher education has gone up much more than inflation, and so while that might be an easy scapegoat to blame college cost on, it's simply out of control with regards to normal spending. And so I would suggest that maybe we utilize those dollars towards other programs instead of higher education, and maybe that's a result of who's voting and who's representing whom in lawmaking bodies. And so those are, you just pick one or two of those to analyze a little more deeply, but that's what we're looking for in a discussion on demographics. As always, send me an email if you need to chat or talk about any of these ideas. Everything else seems to be going okay in the course, and I think we're moving right along. It's a fast-paced course, but many of you are doing quite well. So I'll let you get back to it. Make sure you achieve those deadlines. The long essay 1 is due July 25th and 2 is due August 2nd. Have a good day.